Here with me to celebrate Juneteenth is Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. Welcome to TCM.
So happy to be here.
So you are a professor of law at both Columbia University and UCLA.
Correct.
And you are the executive director of the African American Policy Forum,
Yes.
which is a social justice think tank.
Yes.
You do such remarkable work, and it's such an honor to be able to talk with you today about artists who are, to use one of your terms, back talkers.
That's right.
So coming up next, we're going to look at one of the most famous back talkers and blacklisted Black performers of all time, the great Paul Robeson. Let's talk about Paul Robeson's significance as an artist, just the diversity of talents that he had.
I mean, he was a quadruple threat. He was a lawyer. He graduated at the top of his class out of Rutgers, went to Columbia Law School. He also was lettered in multiple sports. He was a performer, both an actor and a singer, and as we'll eventually see in this film, a producer, writer as well. So this was a person who was an icon to not just African Americans, but to many Americans. Paul Robeson was a household name. Everybody knew who Paul Robeson was.
Yeah, so blacklisting him was huge. He was a global superstar.
He was a global superstar.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the film we're going to watch is called Song of Freedom from 1936. He plays a dock worker in England who just happens to have an amazing bass baritone voice. And he has a dream of going back to Africa. He's never been, but he knows that's the land of his ancestors. Mm-hmm. Robeson always thought of himself as this international figure. What do you think is the significance of him understanding himself as a global citizen?
Well, you know, he was on the cutting edge of understanding that the struggles over racism, over colonialism, over class oppression were actually linked. It would only come to sort of common conversation a few decades later that, you know, struggles in Africa for independence were connected to the struggles of African Americans here. So he was out there early on making those connections. So it's not surprising that eventually some of those connections would show up in his artistry.
Yes. You talked about the fact that he worked on many different aspects of this film. Mm-hmm. It was important to him, wasn't it, that he was not only on camera, but that he was shaping the kind of image that he was producing on screen.
So he has the final cut. And, you know, a lot of artists, particularly those who were more politically oriented, who were advocating for equity and justice, were often frustrated that, you know, what they thought they performed and what they ultimately saw was quite different because they didn't have the final cut. They didn't have a say. So this is a moment where we get to see what Paul Robeson's own vision actually was.
Yes. His associations with various organizations, again, got him in trouble with the U.S. government, accusations of being a communist and disrupting the American way of life. Why do you think it was so important to target him in particular?
Well, when you have somebody who's such a triple threat, who is so famous, so well regarded, if you can take him out, and there were those, even in the government, directly in the government, who thought that he would be the example. You take him out, ordinary people would think, well, why should we continue to agitate? Look what happened to Paul Robeson. And so at a certain point, he went from making, in today's dollars, millions of dollars to making under $100,000. That is quite a fall from grace. Yes. It's a cautionary tale for anybody who might be oriented like him to talk back.
Yeah. And to think about how his global travels had been so significant and taking his passport away from him.
It was taking 8 years. He couldn't travel anywhere.
Yeah. Well, we're going to watch a film that he made in the UK. And we'll talk more after the film about the way that it represents his understanding of himself as a global citizen. Thank you so much, Professor Crenshaw. Let's take a look. From 1936, here is Song of Freedom. Back with me to discuss Song of Freedom and Paul Robeson is Professor Kimberly Crenshaw.
So happy to be here.
So happy to have you here on Juneteenth to talk about this range of extraordinary Black artists and freedom fighters and back talkers.
Yes.
So Paul Robeson in Song of Freedom. This is a complicated film.
Very.
Let's talk about how his desire to go to Africa is represented in this film.
Yeah, so, anyone who has these sentiments about how our struggles are connected, that there is a global dimension of inequality that comes from colonialism and racism and enslavement, is going to be drawn to the idea of reconnection. But it gets messy when we're talking about the terms of the reconnection.
Yes.
So Paul Robeson, the character, is drawn back to his ancestral home, but not simply to be an ordinary citizen there, but to go and reclaim his rightful title as king. That gets a little complicated, right? It's like, I'm just going to kind of go back and save my people. That has elements of colonialism, obviously. What is it that he's bringing? He's bringing Western ideas, Western technology, and he's treating what he frames as superstition and ignorance. Well, there's not a great deal of difference between his gaze upon the African diaspora and the gaze of the white missionaries.
Yes.
It's just, he's doing it out of love and sort of an ancestral connection, as opposed to as, a Christian civilizing mission. It's one thing to want to reconnect. It's another thing to come over here and try to dictate the terms of life. That's a sticky wicket right there.
Sticky wicket, yes. And then we might say his whole career is a series of sticky wickets with regard to cinema.
Yeah.
I mean, we see him in some roles like when he plays Joe in Showboat, who's this lazy figure, or other moments where he's complicated.
He is complicated. That's what makes this one stand out a little bit more, because presumably he has more control here than he did with, Showboat.
Right, exactly.
So it is a reflection, I think, of a set of ideas that at that point we're still developing about how the African diaspora interacts with each other.
Yes. So you are a professor of law at two institutions, UCLA and Columbia University. Paul Robeson got his law degree at Columbia University. And when you shared with me that Robeson is not really formally honored at Columbia University Law School.
Absolutely. And that is really a contemporary marker of the consequences of the blacklisting. So imagine, this is someone who, again, was one of the most famous Black people, artists, entertainers, and also a lawyer. And we don't have a named scholarship, a named chair. And that's why it is important and was important for us to talk about the other blacklists, Black people who are blacklisted, because many people don't know this history, and it's not entirely historical, to the extent that somebody like Paul Robeson is not completely and totally embraced. It is the long shadow of the blacklist that we're still dealing with.
Yes, the long shadow and the reach of it. There are so many artists. Hazel Scott.
Hazel Scott. She was the first Black person to have a television show 3 times a week. She lost that, and the fact that she ever existed was erased. All of the tapes of the show were thrown in the Hudson River. So this censorship, this erasure, this blacklisting, it not only shapes the careers of those who are subject to it, it shapes our memory of them, it shapes the artistry they represent, and the message of their activism.
Yes, the histories that we can write and recover, absolutely. Well, that's why we're here today.
Yes.
To bring to life the stories of these incredible Black artists. Thank you so much, Professor Crenshaw.
Thank you for having me.
Please stay here and don't go away, because coming up next, we have a classic by Lorraine Hansberry.
Next on TCM, A Raisin in the Sun, then Cried the Beloved Country, and later, I Heard It Through the Grapevine. We listen to James Baldwin tonight.